You're not freezing. You're not snowbound. You're surrounded by green things, bird song, warm sun, but you're starving. There's nothing to eat, not really. Not for you. The animals are lean. The tubers are toxic. And the berries that once bloomed in spring have long since vanished. This is the real famine season, not winter, but summer. You don't know it yet, but what you store now will determine if your clan makes it to the next year. And what you store won't just be food, it'll be heat, energy, fat, and knowledge. Because summer, in the deep timeline of human evolution, is a cruel trick. It looks abundant, but it's when the body breaks down, when your brain runs on fumes. And if you think ancient humans had no way to prepare, you're about to uncover secrets stored in bones, caves, and biochemical memory. You've been here before, just not recently. You step into the sun, and for a moment you feel safe. The air is warm, thick with the scent of grass and dust. Birds call from the canopy. Trees bear leaves so dense they block the sky, and rivers glitter like threads of glass. Your skin drinks in the heat. After the long frost, you should be thriving now. This is the season of light, of movement, of abundance. But something isn't right. Your stomach is hollow. Your limbs feel heavy, not with sleep, but with a strange kind of hunger. You've been walking for hours, but the meat is lean. The tubers you once dug up with ease are bitter now, too toxic to eat raw. The berries that nourished you in spring are gone. And though the world around you pulses with life, none of it is yours. This is the contradiction no one told you about. Summer is not salvation. It's the trap. You were taught to fear winter, the snow, the scarcity, the slow creep of cold into the bones. But winter was honest. You saw it coming. You could prepare. You could store meat in the frozen ground, shelter together, burn the fat of animals killed in the final hunts. You slept longer, moved less, survived on silence. But summer lies. It wears the mask of generosity while quietly draining your reserves. Plants mature past edibility. Game animals grow sleek but stringy. Fish vanish into deeper currents. And your metabolism, now spurred by heat and constant movement, burns through the last of your winter stores. The fat you once hoarded is gone. What's left is fire in your belly and a gnawing thought in the back of your mind. This is when people die. You're not alone. Anthropologists have been puzzled by the patterns in the bones. In cave after cave, across continents and climates, the same story appears, but only when you know where to look. Fractures in adolescent femurs, shrinking growth rings in adult teeth, traces of undernourishment etched into the calcium of the dead, not in midwinter but in the height of summer. Why? Because this isn't a story about the cold. It's a story about timing, about the cruel misalignment between nature's rhythm and human need. Spring gives too little too early. Fall gives too much too late. And summer sits in between, bright and cruel, demanding movement while offering nothing to sustain it. You might think this is a mistake of evolution, that early humans were unprepared. But you'd be wrong. The truth is more haunting. They knew. They knew which animals to kill and when. They knew how to drain marrow from bones weeks after the meat had gone rotten. They knew which seeds to dry, which roots to bury, which bitter nuts to leach clean of poison. They knew that fat, not meat, was the true currency of survival. They learned it the hard way, through hunger, collapse, and the memory of those who didn't make it through the sunlit months. And they didn't just store food, they stored time. Because survival wasn't about reacting to what was around you. It was about remembering what was and predicting what would be. They built calendars into the landscape, etched migration routes into their minds, passed stories from mouth to mouth that held the keys to ripening cycles and famine signs. And as you step deeper into their world, you realize something else. They didn't hoard food for winter. They hoarded it for now. For this moment, when everything looks alive, but your body feels like it's dying. When movement means heat, and heat means hunger. When being too late by a week meant starvation, not in the snow, but in the sun. You can feel it now, can't you? That slow dissonance between what your eyes see and what your bones sense. The summer looks full, but something ancient in you whispers that this is when you're most at risk, when comfort breeds blindness, when the danger isn't cold but complacency. You were never meant to survive summer by default. You had to plan for it months in advance, store not just calories, but knowledge, relationships, memory. You had to know the signs. You had to be ready to fast, to ferment, to wait. And if you weren't, you became one more skeleton in the cave, one more body telling a future archaeologist that you mistimed the sun. So now you begin to look at summer differently, not as the season of plenty, but as the final test, the true famine, the quiet predator that hides in warmth and light. And the story you're about to live through, the story buried in pits, preserved in fat and whispered in ritual, is how your ancestors beat it. You survived not because you hunted well, but because you stored right. Stored what? That's what we're about to uncover. You wake before dawn, and the sky is still dusky purple when you crawl out from the hollow of your sleeping place. The air smells of dew and crushed grass, and in that gentle half-light you feel the first flicker of confidence. Everywhere you look, life unfurls in lavish textures, blossoms so bright they seem to glow from within, grasses that ripple like green rivers, insects 1,000 kinds of iridescent. Somewhere downstream a heron lifts off the water with the slow power of a glider, and the splash of its wings seems to promise abundance. You let the scene wash over you, and for a heartbeat you almost believe what it's telling you. Everything you need is right here. But then your stomach folds in on itself, a cold, hollow knot reminding you that yesterday's meals were thin and the day before had none at all. You tighten the hide thong at your waist to blunt the ache and you begin to walk. The ground is soft, broken only by scattered hoofprints. Fresh trails, good sign, you think, until you spot the droppings, dry and scant, shaped more by scarcity than by plenty. The animals have been grazing hard, and every leaf has become cellulose, every twig a gamble of energy you can't afford to chew. Their bodies may look sleek in the morning sun, but that sleekness is really an absence. No backlog of fat, no marrow worth cracking, nothing to carry them safely into autumn, much less you. You follow the riverbank, scooping up handfuls of water so cold it makes your teeth ache. Beneath the glittering surface, fish dart and flicker, tantalizingly close, yet each one is barely a finger's width across. They've spawned and spent themselves. Their flesh is pale, almost translucent, and though you could net a basket full you, burn more calories catching them than you'd earn by eating them. You take one anyway, bite into its head, suck the tiny brain, and swallow the bitterness for the hint of fat it contains. The taste lingers metallic on your tongue, a reminder that you're not seeking flavor anymore, you're chasing chemistry. Hot sunlight climbs and the valley turns noisy with insects. Dragonflies zip past your nose, wings thrumming like taut wires. Somewhere in the grass a lark kicks up, skimming your shoulder in its panic. Everything is alive, everything is moving, and yet nothing holds what you need. You reach an elder tree laden with purple clusters that look plump and sweet, but the berries are a trick of timing. Their sugars peaked weeks ago, and now they ferment in their skins. A mouthful could tear your gut, wreck your balance, and waste a whole afternoon curled in pain. So you pass them by. A patch of wild parsnip offers leafy fronds as lace-fine as any salad, but you've learned the scars of blistering sap once. You will not learn it twice. Your footsteps drum a steady rhythm against the hardening earth, and with every mile your body craves something denser, something that will stay. You remember winter kills, thick fur pulled back to reveal white fat, the way it smelled faintly sweet as it rendered over a low fire, the way a single strip could coat your tongue and hush hunger for hours. You think of marrow so yielding it slid from the bone like softened butter, of brains scooped with a sliver of flint and pressed directly onto your tongue. Back then the cold served as your larder, the land your ally. Now the heat is an accomplice to rot, and time is your enemy. A red deer stag emerges from the underbrush ahead of you, antlers in velvet, eyes bright. His muscles roll beneath a hide as smooth as polished wood, and you feel a sudden surge of hope. But when he turns broadside, you see the ribs. They press like ladder rungs against the skin. Kill him and the meat will be lean, stringy, overloaded with protein that your kidneys can barely process without fat to buffer it. The joke of summer is that a feast can starve you faster than a fast. You let the stag go. He lopes away, hooves drumming a hollow dirge you can almost dance to, if only you had the strength. Sweat beads at your temples. Your heart thumps harder than it should for so little exertion, a sure sign that your glycogen stores are spent. Warmth that once felt welcoming now bakes your shoulders, and every breeze seems to carry off a little more water than it gives back. You imagine the glucose leaching from your muscles, the liver stripping itself to feed your brain, the delicate trick where your body keeps cognition alive by cannibalizing motion. You are a living equation, calories in, calories out, variables shifting with sun and shade. And right now the sum tilts toward collapse. Yet you keep walking because motion is memory and memory is survival. You search the ridgeline for a tree you marked in spring, a twisted birch whose bark peeled in ribbons like curled parchment. Beneath its roots, weeks ago, you cached something precious. You find the tree at last. Its white skin gleams in the heat haze like a signal fire. Kneeling, you scrape away the leaf litter, dig with a pointed stick until the soil turns cool. Your fingers brush hide. You tug up a swollen pouch bound in sinew, and the scent that escapes is equal parts rancid and irresistible. Rendered fat blended with pulverized dried meat, pemmican before the word existed. You slice a plug, press it flat with your thumb, and place it on your tongue. It melts into oil and salt and the iron tang of blood, and within minutes, a tremor of energy ripples along your spine. You almost sigh. Here, finally, is density. But even as strength returns, the pouch in your hands warns you. It is half the weight it once was. You have raided it twice already when mornings began with that same hollow knot. The math is simple. Another couple of weeks at most, and this reserve will vanish. Beyond that, nothing, unless you find more or make more. And making more now, at the very moment when resources are lowest, means choosing between the grind of foraging and the greater gamble of stalking bigger prey. Either way, you burn before you bank. You look out over the landscape again with new eyes. The illusion of plenty wasn't a mirage set to mock you. It was a veil your ancestors learned to tear away. They read the land like a ledger, green canopy as expenses, bone racks as balance sheets. They knew that fat belonged to cold months, sugars to fleeting blooms, protein to waste unless paired with energy. They developed strategies that sound like prophecy. Hunt juveniles before the rut, trap eels in moon-dark shallows, boil dug-up tubers not once but twice, bury the toxic water downstream so no child drinks it. They even measured the distance between migration corridors and nut groves, mapping in their heads the places where protein could be swapped for starch in silent trade with the future. As you chew the last of the pemmican, you marvel that this knowledge, fragile as a spider thread, persisted at all. It survived only because it was stored in story. Night fireside tales of children saved by a forgotten cache, songs that listed plants in the precise order they ripen, dances that mimicked the lean gait of deer in midsummer to signal which ones not to chase. Without such stories, hunger erased the tellers. With them, clans endured. And you realize something as vital as the fat on your tongue. Survival never belonged to the strongest or the swiftest. It belonged to the most attentive. The sun arcs overhead, and shadows shrink to nothing. The birdsong that greeted you at dawn has faded into a shimmering silence broken only by the ticking rasp of insects. Somewhere beyond the ridge lies the next test, perhaps a stand of pines littered with unripe cones, or a marsh where cattail roots hide starch inside bitter skins. Perhaps a cliff where swifts nest behind a waterfall, their fledglings fat with insect oil if you dare climb for them. Each possibility is a promise, and each promise carries risk. But risk is the currency of the thin time, and ignorance is the tax that devours it. You rise, sling the pouch across your back, and tighten the thong once more. The knot in your stomach loosens just enough to let resolve slip in beside it. The illusion of plenty has been pierced. Now you see the land as it truly is. A brilliant guise draped over scarcity, a puzzle box that punishes anyone who opens it too late. You step forward, mind racing through remembered cues, bark texture, moon phase, animal spoor, seeking the next deposit in nature's hidden bank. Because unless you find it soon, the sun will keep rising, the fat will keep melting, and the equinox will arrive indifferent to who crosses its threshold alive. And somewhere, just beyond the horizon, the real hunger season is already waiting to begin. You don't notice it at first. At dawn, it's a small thing, a pause between thoughts, a slight delay in memory, like a name on the tip of your tongue that never quite arrives. You brush it off, blame the heat or the sleep you didn't get. But the lag spreads. Your limbs feel heavier by midday. You reach for a stone and misjudge its weight. Your pace slows not because you want to conserve energy, but because you can no longer afford to waste it. Your mind has started pulling the emergency brake. By the time the third sun passes without a proper meal, You feel it in your spine and in your speech. You forget the second half of a sentence halfway through saying it. You stand too long in place, staring at nothing, not because you're thinking, but because your brain has trimmed the budget for thought. This isn't just exhaustion. It's a biological pivot, a rewiring. Your body has recognized that food is no longer a given, and it's begun the slow retreat into scarcity mode. And this slow descent into hunger, was as familiar to your ancestors as the turning of the seasons. Your stomach grumbles, but it's not the most urgent voice anymore. The real shifts are silent. Hormones begin to recalibrate. Leptin, the signal that once said you're full, you're safe, drops like a stone. Ghrelin surges. Your muscles tighten in a strange, restless way, ready to move, to search. And still nothing comes. Cortisol rises steadily. You're not panicked, not yet, but a new baseline has been set. Alert, edgy, aware. Every movement in the brush feels like a potential meal or a potential threat, and your body doesn't fully distinguish between the two anymore. Hunger has pulled you closer to your animal core. And still you go without. After days of protein without fat or starchy roots stripped of their calories by boiling and leaching, your liver begins to ration glucose. The fat on your hips, what little remains, is pulled into circulation. Ketones flood your bloodstream. You begin to metabolize yourself to stay conscious. Your dreams change. Sleep becomes lighter, broken by waking visions. You begin to crave not just food, but the idea of food. The smell of cooked marrow, the weight of honeycomb, the snap of dried fish skin. These things haunt you, but they also guide you. Your hunger sharpens memory, reshapes attention. You notice the color of leaves where bees might hide their hives. You track a tuft of fur snagged in the underbrush for a quarter-mile, even as your body begs you to stop. This is what hunger really is, not an absence but a pattern, a cycle as old as fire. You were built not to avoid it but to live through it. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, there's a wordless rhythm to these changes. In the dry season, game grows scarce and tubers toughen. The men lose weight rapidly, their ribs visible, their movements slower. The women dig deeper for edible roots, but returns diminish. Fertility drops, not by choice, but by chemical decree. The body refuses to risk new life when it can barely sustain its own. Among the San and the Kalahari, the hunger season is known, not feared. It has a shape, a timeline. Elders can tell you when the fat will vanish and when the nuts will return. Their songs shift in tone and theme, adapting to the hunger cycle. Humor softens tension and memory keeps hope alive. Stories are told more often when bellies are empty, not to distract but to rehearse survival itself. Even in colder regions like the far northern taiga, hunter-gatherers once tracked hunger like the phases of the moon. It was predictable. You didn't panic because it always came, like wind, like birth, like death. And so you prepared for it, not just with food but with biology. In times of scarcity, testosterone falls, libido fades, sex becomes rare not because of cultural taboo but because biology whispers, wait. In women, the menstrual cycle halts altogether. Energy is redirected. You're not broken, you're optimized for famine. Nature's math is ruthless but elegant. And hunger doesn't just blunt reproduction. it changes risk. In early stages, you become more cautious. Your brain hoards serotonin like it hoards calories. But once hunger crosses a critical threshold, the shift reverses. Risk-seeking spikes. You take bolder paths. You climb where you wouldn't have before. The gamble is no longer optional, it's necessary. If you don't make a dangerous move, you will die. So your body makes the choice for you. You once thought of hunger as an emergency, something gone wrong, but now you see it differently, as a season, one that shaped your ancestors again and again, carving their strategies into the folds of their brains and the lengths of their limbs. Your muscles were never designed to stay swollen year-round. Your gut microbiome adjusts with the shifts in diet, storing information in the arrangement of enzymes and flora. Even your face changes. Cheeks hollow, eyes sharpen. Your voice grows quieter. You become more watchful, more inward. You return to something older than memory, a version of yourself honed by 10,000 seasons of waiting. And here's the strange part. You don't panic anymore. Because now hunger is familiar, predictable. The rhythm of it makes sense. You realize that the ancestors who survived weren't those who fought hunger, but those who knew it, who saw its signs and set their lives to its tempo, who taught their children to expect it, prepare for it, and see through its illusions. The cache isn't just a survival tool, it's a time capsule, a message from your past self to your future starving self. You knew this was coming. You acted in time. So now, as your stomach folds again and your thoughts slow into something deeper, you begin to think not just about how to eat, but about how to prepare for next time, what to store, when to rest, how to shape your habits around what your biology has always known. Because hunger isn't the opposite of life. It's what life had to pass through, again and again, to become what it is. And in that empty space behind your ribs, something stirs, not despair, but pattern, a beat, a pulse, the faint, familiar rhythm of a season you were born to endure. And soon, you'll learn what your ancestors stored to meet it. You kneel in dry soil, and the moment your fingers touch the edge of bone, the world goes quiet. It's a femur half exposed and cracked in a spiral down the shaft, not from violence, not from decay, but from something older, slower, pressure, hunger, time. You lift it gently, brushing soil from the curve, and feel the faint memory of a life passed through strain. These fractures didn't come from trauma. They came from the inside out. A body starved long enough to begin pulling itself apart. You hold it, and you begin to see the story written in calcium and collagen. You think back to what you've just learned, that hunger had a season and it was summer. Now the bones confirm it, because flesh rots, memories fade, but the body keeps score. And the archaeological record is not silent. It's whispering constantly if you know how to listen. Here, in the loose red earth of a Paleolithic site, maybe Dalny Vestonis, maybe Starkar, maybe a nameless patch of wild that once held a campfire and a dream, the skeletons speak. And what they say is chilling. Shallow growth lines in children's teeth, showing abrupt stops in development. Femora and tibiae with Harris lines, momentary interruptions in bone growth, etched like scars from malnutrition. Enamel hypoplasias, like ghost bruises across the smile of a child who stopped eating long enough for their body to hesitate. The illusion of a lush summer collapses under this evidence. There were no guarantees. More light didn't mean more life. In fact, the heat accelerated decay. Meat turned rancid in days. Fish caught in early abundance vanished by July. And without storage, without a system, all that richness meant nothing. You move through the site slowly, reverently, as if walking through a frozen memory. You find adult skeletons with worn molars, not from age, but from grit. Stone-ground seeds and roots, barely digestible, eaten in desperation. You find pelvic bones with wide gaps in female joints, signs of high birth mortality and undernourished pregnancies. And in one corner, beneath a collapsed rock shelf, you find something else. A pit. Not a grave, not quite, but it's deliberate, dug deep, lined with stones. Inside, a scatter of bones, long bones, broken open, split down their lengths. This wasn't waste, this was extraction. Marrow, rich and fatty, pulled from the inside of old kills. Stored, maybe. Hidden from heat and predators. Or fermented, allowed to sour, anaerobically sealed like a primitive preservation technique before the word technique even existed. You pause, let that sink in. They weren't just eating to survive. They were thinking ahead, preserving, planning, even in the middle of collapse. Isotope analysis from similar sites confirms the pattern. Carbon and nitrogen ratios shift over months. You can see the seasonal tapering of diet. Spring brings protein spikes, fresh kills, fish runs. Then the slow decline, a fatting of diversity. By mid to late summer, the isotope signatures flatten. Fewer animal proteins, more fallback foods, less variety. Survival narrows. You don't need to imagine it, it's here, in the chemistry of the dead. And you begin to wonder, how did they manage? What could they possibly save? You think about the caches of pits dug deep in permafrost soil. Bones tell you they existed. You see the marks of planning, carefully stacked remains, meat dried and sealed in hide. In some places, stone boxes buried in riverbanks. It wasn't just about hunting. It was about holding time still. They learned to store marrow and long bones, the shaft sealed at both ends with clay or bark. They buried dried organs in pits, high in iron and fat, shielded from insects by layers of ash. They even fermented fish in moss-lined pits, a sour bacterial preservation that staved off hunger months later. We know this because the bones say so. Because the pit isn't just a hole, it's a decision, a strategy, a kind of memory. And sometimes you find bones from the wrong season. Antlers shed in spring, buried in summer caches. Fish species that spawn in late spring, appearing in contexts clearly dated to autumn. They didn't just eat what was around them. They moved resources across time. They were thinking months ahead, long before the leaves turned, long before the sun began to shrink. You look again at the child's skeleton nearby. Small, fragile, stunted femurs, ribs too narrow, jaw misaligned from nutritional stress. But they lived longer than they should have. Why? Because someone fed them, someone dipped into the cache, someone shared. This is what the bones reveal, not just suffering but ingenuity, not just death but persistence. Even their tools tell the story. In some sites, you find grooved stones, shaped not for cutting but for pounding, pulverizing nuts, seeds, marrow. You find residue traces, fats, blood proteins, still clinging to the microstructure of ancient grinding stones. These weren't random acts. They were culinary decisions made in the shadow of starvation. And every cracked femur, every ash-lined pit, is a message from those who came before you. We knew how to survive when everything seemed full but was secretly empty. We knew how to read the false promise of summer, and we prepared. You set the bone down gently, because now you see it clearly. Survival didn't just depend on what was hunted or gathered, but on what was preserved, on the caches, the plans, the foresight. Hunger was seasonal, yes, but the answer to it was. It was strategy written in bone, and it was passed down. You brush the dirt from your hands, and you realize the next step is no longer about looking down, but looking forward. What exactly were they storing? Not just how, but what? What was considered precious enough to save when everything else spoiled? That question will take you deeper, into the minds of the ancient foragers who understood the mathematics of survival. And the clues they left behind may still lie beneath the next layer of earth. Imagine yourself crouching beside a shallow depression in the earth, your hands tracing the soft soil as you dig deeper and deeper. The air around you is warm, the sun high and relentless. Sweat beads on your forehead, but you don't stop. This pit is more than a hole in the ground. It's a promise, a gamble against the merciless heat that threatens to turn fresh meat into poison before your eyes. You press animal hide over the opening, stretching it taut, securing it with flexible branches, sealing in the coolness below like a secret refuge. What you're building is not just shelter for your food, it's a primitive refrigerator. Not for winter's bitter grasp, but for summer's fleeting abundance, the delicate bounty that must be preserved if you want to survive until the sun's arc begins to shrink again. Long before thermostats, before iceboxes, your ancestors engineered solutions from the landscape itself. Earth pits shaded by towering trees became natural refrigerators, where the soil's steady coolness slowed decay. In colder climes, they sought out permafrost alcoves, caves where the chill never fled, even under the summer sun, hiding meat and marrow in frozen vaults beneath layers of rock and frost. At higher altitudes, beyond the reach of biting insects and boiling heat, caches were buried in snowbanks and crevices. These were precarious preserves, but they extended the life of the harvest, allowing flesh to linger safely beyond its usual expiration. Your hands move carefully, layering the pit with crushed stone and leaves soaked in cool stream water, a primitive insulation, a cradle for what you hope will be survival. You may not understand refrigeration as we do, but your actions echo the same principle: slowing time, halting decay, holding life in stasis. You watch as early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals alike grappled with this problem, not as scientists, but as desperate problem solvers, trialing pit depths, testing seals, experimenting with smoke and fire. Cold smoking, thin plumes of smoke carried over meat hung above smoldering embers, emerged as a revelation. The smoke didn't just flavor, it preserved, coating flesh in chemical barriers against bacteria and insects. No one handed down blueprints. Each generation learned by touch, by failure, by tasting the bitter tang of spoiled meat, and the sweet reward of successful storage. It was engineering in its rawest form, intuition calibrated by necessity. You imagine the first time someone buried a cache too shallow. The meat spoiled, the gamble lost, and hunger sharpened its claws. The next attempt went deeper, the seal tighter. Slowly, the design refined itself, encoded in collective memory. In this cooling chamber, beneath the sun's relentless glare, you feel the pulse of innovation beating strong. It's not the invention of technology in the modern sense. It's a primal act of defiance against time and entropy. Your ancestors created refrigerators not just to store food, but to store hope. Hope that the summer bounty could carry them through the lean months ahead. As you cover the pit with earth and stones, you realize this simple act carries the weight of survival itself. And this innovation, this humble earth pit, is the hinge on which the future would turn. But refrigeration alone was not enough. What exactly were they storing? And how did these early inventors decide what was worth preserving in these fragile, life-saving caches? The answers lie just ahead. You move silently through the tall grasses, every sense sharpened, heart steady but racing beneath your skin. This isn't just a hunt for flesh, it's a hunt for life itself, for the invisible currency that fuels your survival. Because you've learned something fundamental, protein alone won't keep you alive. Not through the lean months, not through the hunger seasons when the sun is high and the world feels empty. What you need isn't just meat, it's fat. Fat is energy distilled, a concentrated flame stored in flesh. It's the difference between survival and slow starvation. You know this instinctively, the pounding ache in your belly during a famine, the way your muscles begin to waste away despite eating scraps of protein. Calories vanish like ghosts unless they're packed with the dense, slow-burning fuel only fat can provide. You track an animal, your eyes fixed not on the broad muscle but on the marrow-rich bones beneath the skin. When you finally strike, your hands work fast, breaking open femurs, humery, rib cages. You're not simply a predator, you're a collector of energy. The slick, golden marrow gleams in the dying light, a treasure trove of survival packed inside a fragile bone vault. You take what the animal offers beyond the obvious. Brains, a rich store of fat and nutrients, organs heavy with energy, the thick subcutaneous layers. This is the true prize. To your ancestors, these parts weren't scraps. They were weapons in a battle against hunger. Back at camp, you set about rendering the fat. A slow, smoky fire simmers beneath a clay pot, and you patiently coax the tallow from raw marrow and suet. The thick liquid pools and cools, a translucent reservoir of stored sunlight transformed into energy. You pack this tallow carefully into containers fashioned from hollowed bones or animal bladders, sealing them tight against air and rot. These precious stores will fuel your body for weeks, maybe months, a battery that can be carried and traded. Because fat isn't just sustenance, it's currency. You trade it with neighboring groups, an unspoken pact woven through exchange. For water, for tools, for alliances. Fat lubricates not only muscles but also social bonds. You feel the logic of evolution ripple through this practice. Your brain, your body, even your culture were shaped by this relentless need for fat. Without it, Reproduction falters, cognition dulls, and bodies crumble under the weight of chronic energy deficit. You realize that every marrow cache, every hidden pot of tallow is a declaration, a refusal to surrender to starvation. This was the secret weapon your ancestors wielded in the struggle to thrive through the harshest seasons. But fat alone wasn't enough to win this war. It had to be protected, preserved, hidden from scavengers and spoilage. And that, as you'll soon discover, led to innovations that would transform not only survival but the very fabric of early human society. The story of fat is the story of life itself, raw, essential, and fiercely fought for. And it's just the beginning. Your hands are stained deep ochre from the fine powder that coats your fingers, the residue of crushed acorns, sharp and bitter against your tongue. You taste the dryness, the lingering bitterness, and know instinctively this isn't food yet. This is a promise, a first step toward survival, but it must be coaxed carefully before it can feed you. The raw acorn contains tannins, poisons that will poison you if consumed too soon. What you hold in your hands is potential, but it requires patience, days of soaking, leaching, drying, before it can transform into sustenance. You begin to understand that the prehistoric diet wasn't only about the immediate kill or the fresh catch. It was about labor, slow, deliberate, seasonal labor, transforming nature's bounty into durable nourishment. Nuts, grains, tubers, these weren't mere snacks picked and eaten raw. They were raw materials for survival, needing refinement, detoxification, and careful storage. The bitterness of the acorn powder is a reminder that early humans were not just foragers but alchemists of the natural world, turning poison into life. As you work, grinding between stones worn smooth by generations, you can almost hear the echo of ancient hands before you. In the dry riverbeds of Mesolithic Europe, in the scrubby savannas of Africa, and among the woodlands of early Native Americans, similar rituals unfolded. Caches of nuts buried in pits lined with leaves, grains stored in woven baskets, tubers dried in the sun, each carefully protected from pests and rot. These were deliberate acts, investments in tomorrow when the sun's generosity would wane and hunger would rise. The slow process of detoxification mirrors the slow march of the seasons themselves. The sun bleaches and bakes the earth, and you soak and rinse the meal over days, watching bitter tannins wash away, replaced by mild, nourishing flavors. Every step is a negotiation with nature, a test of knowledge and endurance. Your hands ache, but you press on because you know these seeds hold more than calories. They carry the weight of survival, the hope that your body will not wither when meat and fat run dry. You think of the long tunnels of storage pits discovered by archaeologists, their earthen walls lined with husks and shells, sealed with clay and bark. These were the granaries of prehistory, cradling food through months of scarcity, proof that survival depended not just on hunting skill, but on mastering the invisible art of preservation. In every grain and nut, you see a quiet revolution unfolding, the shift from mere gathering to early agriculture's first whisper. The seeds you grind today are the seedlings of civilization, waiting patiently underground, beneath layers of earth and time, to nourish the future. And as you rise, fingers stained and back aching, You realize this laborious ritual is not just about filling empty stomachs. It's about reclaiming control over the seasons, bending time to your will, and planting the seeds of a future meal that will carry you through the hunger that summer hides. But even these carefully stored foods could not face the sun's scorch alone. They needed protection and transformation. What came next was the mastery of fire and fermentation, and the next chapter will take you into that ancient world of transformation where food became not just fuel, but life preserved in flame and bacteria's invisible work. You catch the smell before you even lift the vessel, a sharp, tangy scent that twists through the air like the breath of something living, something ancient. It's sour and earthy, almost electric with life, and it stops you in your tracks. You lean closer, curious and cautious. This wasn't supposed to happen. You had left a batch of gathered berries and crushed grains resting in a dark corner, wrapped loosely in leaves, only to return days later and discover that something extraordinary was unfolding. What you're experiencing is the birth of fermentation, one of the earliest, most profound discoveries of humanity, accidental at first, then deliberate. It isn't about intoxication or celebration, at least not yet. It's about survival, because fermentation transforms fragile food, prone to rot and waste, into something stable, nourishing, and even beneficial. It's preservation, yes, but it's also a metamorphosis, a dance with invisible microbes that convert sugars and starches into acids and alcohols, creating a new kind of food alive with probiotic power. You dip your fingers into the bubbling vessel, feeling the slight fizz against your skin, the texture thickening but still pliant, almost creamy. The smell grows stronger, complex, part sharp citrus, part earthy humus, and something wild and untamed beneath it all. You taste it carefully, and your tongue recoils, surprised by the sour tang, the subtle sweetness balanced by a deep, fermented richness. It's unlike anything fresh could offer, and it lingers, filling your mouth with a promise of endurance and strength. This was the alchemy of fire and microbes working hand in hand. Fire dried your tubers and meats, pulling moisture away and halting decay, but fermentation added something else: stability, diversity, and health. As the acids built up, they created a hostile environment for pathogens, protecting your precious stores from spoilage. Your gut, long adapted to digest raw foods, began to thrive with this new bounty. The probiotics seeded your microbiome, helping you extract more nutrients and fend off illness in the lean times ahead. You imagine the early humans who first noticed this phenomenon, not understanding the biology but sensing the benefits. The accidental fruit mash left too long in the sun, the meat wrapped too tightly in leaves, suddenly alive with bubbling life. Was there fear, curiosity, awe? You can feel their tentative hands testing the sour liquid, their noses wrinkling before yielding to its promise. Over time, this accidental fermentation became a tool, a partner in survival. Fire, too, was no longer just a source of warmth or protection from predators. It was an instrument of transformation, used to cold smoke meats, char vegetables, and crack open bones for marrow. The flames didn't just destroy, they preserved. Charcoal and smoke created chemical shields against bacteria, extending the life of precious calories. The relationship between fire and fermentation marked a shift. Food was no longer simply gathered and consumed, but crafted, extended, and reimagined. Preservation became transformation, an act that stretched time and space, folding the future into the present. As you inhale the mingled scents of smoke and sourness, you realize that these early innovations were about more than survival. They were about control, control over decay, over scarcity, over the very rhythms of life and death. And with that control came the first whispers of culture, ritual, and identity. What began as necessity slowly became art. But before we delve deeper into these transformations, there's one final frontier to explore: the social bonds forged and strengthened by sharing these preserved foods. How did preservation shape not just what early humans ate, but who they became? The next chapter will lead you into that circle of firelight and shared meals, where food was not just sustenance but connection. You sit quietly beneath a vast sky, the horizon stretching endlessly before you, but your eyes aren't just seeing the land, they're weaving it into memory. The patterns of light and shadow, the curve of a river, the jagged shape of distant hills, all become part of a mental tapestry. This landscape isn't just a place. It's a living map, a storybook etched into your mind, guiding every step, every choice, every survival decision. You realize that before you stored a single nut, buried a pot of tallow, or sealed a cache of dried meat, you stored something far more crucial: knowledge, memory. The ability to track the seasons without clocks, to sense the ripening fruit by subtle changes in scent, to predict rain by the roughness of tree bark or the flight of birds. This wasn't random or fleeting. It was encoded, rehearsed, and passed down like a sacred inheritance. Your mind becomes a vast palace of survival, where landscapes are rooms and pathways are corridors. Each landmark is a mnemonic key, unlocking the secrets of where food hides and when it becomes ripe, where water flows and when the predators hunt. These mental maps guide you through time as much as space, linking the cycles of moon and sun to the rhythms of plant and animal life. You begin to see how these patterns extend beyond geography into kinship and songlines, oral traditions that bind community and environment inextricably together. Stories carry wisdom of when and where to gather, hunt, or move, coded in metaphor and memory, designed to survive countless retellings. This is a form of storage more fragile but more powerful than any pit or jar. It's a cognitive archive that allows you to anticipate scarcity and abundance alike, to navigate the thin line between feast and famine. It's why your ancestors survived harsh summers and bitter winters, not just because of what they ate, but because of what they remembered. In this way, the mind becomes your first and most vital container. The survival of your body depends on the survival of your knowledge. You didn't just store calories, you stored cognition. And this stored cognition would shape not only your meals but your identity, your culture, your future. As you rise from the earth, ready to move forward, you carry more than food in your hands. You carry the wisdom of countless generations, a living memory that will guide you through the seasons to come. But survival is never just memory or food alone. It's what happens when these stored knowledges meet the challenges of a changing world, and the choices your ancestors made next would echo through millennia. The next chapter awaits, where you'll confront those choices and their consequences, and see how the ancient battle with scarcity forged the human story itself. You stand at the edge of the firelight, the warm glow flickering against the dark night, but you're not alone. Across the crackling embers, faces from another band settle beside you, their voices low but welcoming. You offer them meat, chunks of tallow-rich marrow and smoked flesh carefully saved through lean weeks. They accept, their eyes reflecting gratitude and trust. Later, when hunger gnaws at your own camp, they will return the favor, bringing dried roots or stored seeds. This exchange isn't charity, it's survival. It's the currency of trust and alliance forged through countless shared trials. You begin to see that storage wasn't just about what you hid underground or sealed in containers. It was social. The invisible vaults of reciprocity and obligation that spread across landscapes and lifetimes. You feel the weight of these networks as palpably as you feel the stored food in your hands. When your cash runs low, it's these human connections, alliances built on generosity and debt, that become your lifeline. In this system, food is not just calories, it's a social glue, a medium of exchange that binds groups together against the brutal unpredictability of famine. You understand that survival depended on this delicate balance, to give, to receive, to repay. Every shared meal was a promise, every gift a contract etched in trust. These reciprocal exchanges created distributed survival systems far beyond any individual's reach. Your network, your social storage, spread risk across territory and kin, turning isolated scarcity into collective resilience. But there was danger too. Exclusion from these social networks was isolation. Without access to shared caches, without alliances to call upon, a group could wither and die. The stakes were high. You learned that social bonds were as fiercely guarded as food stores themselves. Alliances were nurtured with ritual, song, and repeated generosity, but betrayal or neglect could be fatal. You feel the ancient heartbeat of human cooperation pulsing beneath these interactions. How early humans turned survival into a shared endeavor. How food storage was a foundation for trust and society itself. It was through these social vaults that cultures thrived, expanded, and endured. As the night deepens, you realize that the story of storage is also a story of connection. How hunger forged not only bodies but communities. How survival was never truly solitary. And as you look beyond the firelight toward the vast unknown, you prepare to trace the final steps of this journey. How these networks, these storages of flesh, fat, seed, and memory, shape the rise of civilization itself. The next chapter will pull you into that emergence, the dawn of agriculture, and the profound transformations it unleashed. You sit cross-legged on the cool earth, your stomach empty, the gnawing ache a constant reminder that the stores have run dry. Yet you do not despair. Hunger is no stranger here. It is expected, even embraced. Because when nothing is left to eat, when the cold shadow of famine stretches long and relentless, you turn to something older than food itself: ritual. The drums begin, a steady, hypnotic pulse that vibrates through your chest, syncing with your ragged breath. Voices rise in chant, weaving ancient songs that speak of the sun's return, of the earth's generosity, of endurance beyond the physical. You join the dance, your body moving in time with others, sweat pouring down your skin, flushing out the hunger's sharp edges. Each step, each breath, each chant is a shield against despair. This is not mere superstition. It is survival. Spiritual practices evolved as a vital coping mechanism, an emotional and psychological lifeline that carries you through the hardest days. In these rituals, hunger is transformed from a source of panic into a shared trial, a rite of passage that binds the group together. The pain of empty bellies is softened by collective strength and ancient belief. You feel yourself slipping into trance, guided by the shaman's voice, flickering firelight painting shadows on the faces around you. In sweat lodges, heat presses heavy against your skin, forcing your body to release toxins, not just physical but mental, the fear, the anxiety, the sense of isolation. The group's heartbeat becomes one. Time stretches and folds, hunger receding into a distant echo. Here, belief is not a luxury. It is a buffer against collapse. It shapes your reality, turning scarcity into meaning, loneliness into belonging. These hunger rituals are the last line of defense, a communal embrace that preserves not only bodies but spirits. As the ceremony winds down, you feel the night's cold less sharply, the emptiness within less hollow. You are part of something larger, a continuum of resilience forged in firelight and song. But even as ritual sustains you, the seasons turn inexorably forward. The next challenge awaits. When scarcity ends and abundance returns, how will you survive the fragile transition? The next chapter will carry you into that moment, the precarious dance between hunger and plenty, where the greatest risks still lie ahead. You lie down beneath a sky thick with stars, your body heavy and your mind drifting toward sleep. But this isn't just the tired rest after a long day's hunt or gathering. It's something deeper, a slow, deliberate surrender to stillness, a retreat into lethargy not born of weakness but of survival. Your pulse slows, your breathing eases, and time seems to stretch, softening the sharp edges of hunger and fatigue. This isn't failure, it's adaptation, a biological strategy finely tuned over millennia to meet the harsh rhythms of the seasons. When food becomes scarce, when the sun climbs highest and the world's bounty thins, your ancestors didn't simply fight harder or run faster. They paused, they slowed, they waited. This hidden technology of sleep, this metabolic downshifting, is written deep into your cells and circadian rhythms. Scientific studies reveal that during times of scarcity, your body reduces its energy demands, shifting into a state resembling torpor, a kind of controlled hibernation that conserves precious calories. Indigenous peoples, too, have long understood and embraced seasonal rest, using it to align with nature's ebb and flow rather than resist it. You imagine yourself in those ancient shelters, wrapped in furs, motionless through long afternoons and cool nights, allowing your metabolism to slow like a river, reducing to a gentle stream. Movement is minimized. Muscle tension melts away. Your body preserves energy by decreasing temperature and heart rate, suspending unnecessary functions so you can survive longer without food. This is a profound shift, rest as resistance, inactivity as a tool. The world outside may still be alive with motion and heat, but inside your body, time decelerates. Your mind becomes quieter, thoughts more deliberate. You are not succumbing but conserving, entering a liminal space between wakefulness and rest that carries you through the hardest season. This strategy isn't without risk. Too much lethargy can invite vulnerability, and too little can burn through reserves too fast. But your ancestors mastered the balance, their survival hinging on knowing when to act and when to wait, when to hunt and when to sleep. As you drift deeper into this adaptive slumber, you realize that survival wasn't always about conquest or control. It was about patience, timing, and the wisdom to yield. But rest can only carry you so far. Eventually, the world will stir again, the cycle turning toward abundance once more. When it does, how will you rise? The final chapter awaits, where the lessons of scarcity transform into the promise of plenty and the birth of a new human era. You open your eyes to a room flooded with artificial light, a glow so steady and constant it almost feels unnatural. The hum of modern life wraps around you like a soft cocoon, a far cry from the wild, unpredictable world your ancestors faced. In your kitchen, the fridge stands full, fresh food waiting at any hour, the bounty of seasons preserved by technology rather than toil. Yet, despite this abundance, you feel something ancient stirring beneath the surface. Your body remembers. It carries echoes of those long, merciless summers when food vanished and survival depended not just on what was in your hands, but what was etched into your very cells. The hunger you feel when you see an empty plate, the instinct to store and hoard, the stress that creeps in at the thought of scarcity. They're not just reactions to today's world. They're a legacy written deep within you, inherited from those who lived when summer was the season of hunger, when every calorie saved was a victory over death. Science now reveals how these ancient survival systems continue to shape modern lives. Obesity, binge eating, the cycle of deprivation and craving, all are threads woven from the same primal fabric. Your metabolism, finely tuned for feast and famine, struggles to adjust to constant plenty. Your brain, wired for vigilance against starvation, sometimes misreads abundance as threat, triggering stress responses that were once life-saving, but now can trap you in cycles of anxiety and overconsumption. Intermittent fasting, the practice of cycling between eating and abstinence, echoes the rhythms your ancestors lived by without knowing it. It taps into your body's memory, harnessing metabolic adaptations forged over tens of thousands of years. You realize that you don't just eat calories, you carry a story, a history of survival that shapes how you digest, store, and crave. This journey through the ancient summer famine has shown you more than forgotten caches of marrow or buried seeds. It has revealed the invisible stores inside you, the memories, the instincts, the strategies that still guide you, quietly but powerfully. The summer scarcity never truly disappeared. It went underground, deep inside your DNA, your psyche, your everyday decisions. As you step into the world today, surrounded by abundance but shadowed by old survival ghosts, you carry this knowledge forward. You carry the resilience of those who endured the harshest seasons, the ingenuity of minds that stored not just food but wisdom, and the quiet strength of waiting, resting, and trusting the cycles of life. You are the living continuation of a story millions of years in the making, a story of hunger and hope, loss and renewal, scarcity and plenty. And that story is still unfolding within you with every breath and every meal. The past is never really behind you. It is always beneath your skin, guiding your survival in ways you are only beginning to understand.